Will Danny DeVito find someone to throw Momma from the train? Comedy in 20 minutes.
And that's after tonight's main news from the BBC with Martyn Lewis.
The United Nations is urged to expand its forces in Bosnia and give them the power to intervene. A hard-hitting report by the UN's human rights envoy also says the Muslims have suffered most from atrocities. And the United Nations doubles the emergency aid it is sending to Somalia. Good evening. The United Nations is being urged to intervene in Bosnia to prevent widespread atrocities. In a special report, the UN's human rights envoy, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, says that although all sides are committing atrocities, the Muslims are the group that consistently suffers most. And the former Polish Prime Minister argues that there is an immediate need for concerted action. Mr. Mazowiecki also suggests bringing people to justice not only for perpetrating atrocities, but for tolerating them.
Mr. Mazowiecki was sent to carry out an emergency investigation into human rights in the former Yugoslavia. His report says violations are being perpetrated by all sides. Violence is often tolerated by the authorities. The Bosnian Muslims are consistently suffering the worst. His most ambitious proposal is that the UN peacekeeping force should be expanded and given the power to intervene to prevent atrocities throughout Bosnia. The report came as the European Community's new chief negotiator, Lord Owen, left for a series of meetings with you.
Nothing would please us more than the fighting to cease and to get the parties around the table and the bitterness to gradually go. But, you know, it's not going to be like that. The Balkan, this area has a long history of this sort of problem.
Lord Owen insisted yesterday's attack on a market in Sarajevo underlined the need to get the peace process underway. Already each side has accused the other of reneging on its commitment to peace. Some doubt whether Lord Owen is the man to negotiate a lasting agreement.
That the man who was in favor of the military intervention against one side in the conflict should be chosen as the mediator, as the go-between, as someone that should enjoy the confidence of all sides, is a bit strange. It is a novelty in at least my experience in international affairs. But let's hope for the best.
The Yugoslav Prime Minister Milan Panic, who's pledged to work for peace, is facing a parliamentary no-confidence vote after his public row with Serbia's President Milosevic at the London conference. If Mr. Panic is forced out of office, it may destabilise the fragile framework of the new peace process.
The United Nations has postponed a relief mission to the mainly Muslim town of Gorazde in eastern Bosnia because local Serb forces say it would have only a small chance of getting through safely. In Sarajevo itself, the day has been relatively quiet.
News about the progress of peace talks abroad reaches the offices of the Sarajevo daily paper Liberation this afternoon. The journalists make the traditional jokes about the newsroom being a bit of a mess. Since last Tuesday's shelling, they've put together their 4-page paper with increasing difficulty. But they print 10,000 at dawn and are sold out by breakfast. In this complex war, the editorial staff consists of 3 Serbs, 2 Croats and 2 Muslims. The view from the reporter's table is a permanent reminder, if it was ever needed, of the situation.
Yeah, we're working. We have to work for our newspaper. You see the sniper shooting, but we work. We're working for our people, for freedom, and we hope all this mess will stop one day.
At least the airlift keeps going, the bridge between Sarajevo and the outside world, with the RAF bringing in the 1,000th flight this weekend, swooping onto a runway with no guarantee of safety. Once on the ground, the aid is distributed as best it can be, but outlying districts face delays as the UN has to negotiate safe passage. And today's much-needed convoy to the besieged town of Gorazde was called off. Gorazde has had only one successful supply run, and that was 2 weeks ago. Overnight there were reports that the siege of the town had been lifted by the Serbs, followed by news that the Muslims were on the attack in the area again. No one knows exactly what's happening, so the food and medicine were not sent. Kate Adey, BBC News, Sarajevo.
The United Nations has ordered a dramatic expansion of its relief effort in Somalia. It's sending another 72,000 tons of food to the central and southern regions of the country. That should be enough to feed half of the 4 million Somalis at risk from starvation, if it reaches them.
The announcement means a doubling of the amount of food sent to Somalia by the United Nations. The extra supplies will be sent to central and southern Somalia, where 2.5 million people are in acute danger of dying of starvation. The World Food Programme, a UN agency, will now coordinate all the UN's famine efforts in the country. Mohammed Sarnoun, the Secretary-General's special envoy, admitted that criticism of the UN's relief operation did have some foundation. Save the Children, who've condemned the UN programme as ill-planned, say the latest moves are not enough.
There needs to be a plan to get this food distributed, taking into account the horrendous security problems, and it's this overall plan that the UN has so far completely failed to put together. We've known all along, people have said to us, that food was in the pipeline, so the fact that people are now saying there's food mustn't be used as a smokescreen to conceal the real problem.
The UN will take over some of the American cargo planes airlifting supplies from Kenya. There may now be the beginnings of a coordinated programme, but distribution may still prove a hard problem to solve. The UN admits almost half the aid sent so far has been looted. The former Belgian Prime Minister Wilfred Martens, who's been touring refugee camps in Somalia, has called for the rapid deployment of armed UN troops. The Security Council has already authorised the sending of 3,500 soldiers who will start arriving by mid-September.
A new team of United Nations weapons inspectors has arrived in Baghdad, the first since the Western Allies imposed an air exclusion zone over southern Iraq to protect Shiite Muslims. UN personnel based in Iraq are on maximum security alert after a series of violent attacks on them in recent days.
This latest team of UN inspectors arrived in Baghdad this morning with relations between Iraq and the West at their most tense since the Gulf War. But the Italian leader of the 15-strong team wasn't expecting the Allied action in southern Iraq to cause him problems.
Well, I would think that this wouldn't affect our mission, really.
Are you going to try to avoid any confrontation with the Iraqi authorities?
Well, we had never sought confrontations. Confrontation never occurred.
This morning, an advisor to Saddam Hussein said Iraq had no problem with the inspection team, but he told reporters that the Allied no-fly zone in southern Iraq was part of a plan to dismember the country. Since July's standoff over Iraq's refusal to let UN inspectors into its agriculture ministry, fears of another military confrontation have steadily grown. The latest UN team will undertake what's now become a routine inspection of nuclear sites to check that Iraq has carried out the required destruction. The inspectors have been told to take security precautions after increasing harassment of other UN personnel.
The permanent UN staff that is there, the guards and the people who operate the radio system, have in fact had physical attacks upon them in the last 2 days. On the other hand, you have to say the Iraqis must be very clear that the coalition will take any provocation against the inspectors very seriously and react very quickly.
So far, the Western aircraft patrolling over southern Iraq have met no opposition. But American officials have warned that any obstruction of the UN inspectors could bring retaliation.
Israel has started releasing hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in what it describes as a goodwill gesture to coincide with the latest round of the Middle East peace talks in Washington. The Palestinian delegation at the talks is refusing to accept Israel's proposal for limited Palestinian autonomy, but the two sides are still negotiating.
180 prisoners were released today. The first group was freed at a checkpoint east of Gaza City. Several hundred Palestinians gathered and people wept openly as they were reunited with friends and relatives. Others were taken by bus to the West Bank. Israel says 600 will be freed in stages over the coming week. 7,000 people are still held. A quarter of those have not been charged. In Washington, where the Palestinians described Israeli proposals for limited autonomy as negative and a non-starter, recognized the release as a gesture.
They grouped the prisoners together in order to make this gesture. We acknowledge this, we recognize it, and we hope that they will pursue it further in order to make the gesture into a real change in terms of prison conditions, in terms of the prisoners themselves and the numbers.
The Israelis say they hope the Palestinians will respond by trying to bring about a scaling down of violence on the West Bank and Gaza.
Basically, the overall aim here is to try and create a better atmosphere, a better climate on the ground that will, in return, enhance the atmosphere at the negotiating table.
While on the one hand refusing to accept Israel's plans for limited autonomy, on the other the Palestinians have accepted the establishment of joint study groups to negotiate hurdles such as military law and human rights violations. This falls well short of real progress, but at least the negotiations are continuing. Michael Macmillan, BBC News, Washington.
The German government has promised financial help to police forces in the east of the country to try and stop a wave of racial attacks. In the latest violence, a memorial in Berlin to Jews who died in the Nazi Holocaust was wrecked by a bomb. And 28 people were arrested last night when a crowd of youths attacked a hostel for asylum seekers in Cottbus near the Polish border. They set cars on fire and threw stones and petrol bombs at the police. The government agency which monitors political violence says support for far-right groups is on the increase. Jacques Delors, the European Commission president, has said he will resign if France votes against the Maastricht Treaty on closer European Union next month. Mr. Delors, who's a former French finance minister, said a no vote would force him to step down at the end of the year because he would not be able to overcome the handicap of a loss of French influence. As campaigning in the referendum continues, the latest opinion poll indicates a narrow majority of French people in favour of the treaty. 6 polls taken over the past week suggest the poll will be extremely close. A ceasefire agreed in Georgia over the weekend seems to have collapsed after heavy fighting between government troops and rebel forces who want to break away from the republic. Today's clashes in the Abkhazia region were concentrated around Gagra on the Black Sea. At least 30 people are reported to have been killed.
Georgian government troops are determined to crush all resistance in Abkhazia, but so far they've failed. This civil war appears to be escalating a fortnight after Georgia's leader Eduard Shevardnadze sent in his army, describing the rebels who want independence as forces of evil. Today, Mr. Shevardnadze's ruling state council met in emergency session to debate the crisis, the worst since he took over the republic's leadership 5 months ago. In theory, there was supposed to be a ceasefire today, but this was the reality. Both sides have accused each other of mounting fresh offensives, and for now there seems little chance of a truce that will hold. Mr. Shevardnadze has said that his troops will not withdraw from Abkhazia because he insists it's Georgian territory. Here, his soldiers use walkie-talkies to coordinate a mortar bombardment on the rebel village of Eshera. There have been heavy casualties on both sides. This boat brought in some 20 dead and 50 wounded Georgian troops, victims of ferocious fighting around the town of Gagra. At the same time, civilians are trying to flee from Georgia's latest civil war. Thousands have been evacuated on ferries. This stretch of the Black Sea coast used to be a popular destination for holidaymakers, but suddenly it's turned into a battleground. And for many, the only priority now is to get out. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
An Argentine test pilot and his colleague have been killed in a crash at Herne Airport near Bournemouth. Eyewitnesses said their jet trainer dived straight into the ground and burst into flames. The crew had been practicing a display for next week's Farnborough Air Show. Department of Transport investigators and Argentine embassy officials have gone to the airport to begin an inquiry into the cause of the crash. A Swedish male au pair who was threatened with deportation has been granted a last-minute reprieve by the Home Secretary. Under immigration rules, an au pair must be a woman. Johan Egelstedt, who's 19, has been told he can stay in Britain as a visitor for a month, provided he doesn't work as an au pair.
Johan Egelstedt was on his way to the airport to go back to Sweden when a phone call came through from the family's MP telling them the Home Secretary had intervened. Johan can stay with them for a month as a visitor, and after that can apply for a 6-month extension of his visa.
I feel very good about that. It feels great to be able to stay at last. But
yeah, brilliant though.
he's done a very good job to make me be able to stay. So I feel Very good for nothing.
Britain's immigration rules state that to work as an au pair here, you have to be an unmarried girl aged between 17 and 27 without dependents. Johan can now stay to improve his English, but won't be able to take on the job of looking after the 4 children in the Bourne family from Leicester. They described it as a sad indictment that it took a direct appeal to the Home Secretary to allow him to stay.
He seems to me a perfectly reasonable Swedish young man who would have been allowed in if he'd come as a visitor, and I see no public interest in refusing him, and I hope he enjoys his stay in Leicester.
Despite the happy ending for Johan, the family who wanted to employ him and their MP believe the law on au pairs is archaic and have called for it to be amended.
And that's the BBC News tonight. Good night.
Good evening from Newsroom Southeast. A teenage girl has been badly burned after picking up a piece of explosive phosphorus on a Kent beach. It's thought it was washed overboard from a passing ship. Tara Loughnane was taken to a specialist burns unit.
17-year-old Tara picked up what she thought was a red stone during a family walk on Palm Beach at Margate. It exploded in her pocket, leaving her with serious burns to her stomach and legs. Her parents and 11-year-old sister Misha from Barking in Essex were also burned as they tried to put out the flames.
If it actually dries out, it can ignite and explode, as we believe it did in this case. If anybody sees anything resembling this substance, they should contact the local police.
Tara is being treated at the burns unit at Queen Victoria Hospital at East Grinstead in Sussex, where her condition is said to be stable.
Tens of thousands of people have been celebrating the second day of the Notting Hill Carnival in West London. 3 police officers have been slightly injured while making 2 separate arrests this evening. One, a woman constable, is expected to remain in hospital overnight suffering from concussion. Otherwise, police say crime was well down on previous years.
Over 250,000 people attended today's Notting Hill Carnival to watch Europe's biggest street festival. The cold, wet weather, which had kept many away yesterday, gave way to warm sunshine and the colourful floats and costumes, with dancing both on and off the street. From this control room, police using TV cameras monitored the busiest streets along the carnival route. By this evening, they'd made a total of 58 arrests, half of last year's total. Carnival organisers believe this year's festival has not only been the most successful, but also the most crime-free.
And that's all from Newsroom Southeast on this Bank Holiday Monday. Now let's have a look at the weather. For that we join John Kettley.
Good evening. The weather did approach respectability at long last today, especially in the east of the country, where you had shelter from the stiff westerly wind. So at Skegness and Cleethorpes, not bad at all by recent standards. 18 degrees and 11.5 hours of sunshine for good measure. But there's still a fair amount of rain about in the north and west of Scotland, especially that rain driven on by gale force westerlies for much of tonight. A cluster of showers coming down the western side of the country at the moment as well. There are some showers inland. In fact, there's been some thunderstorms this evening over in Berkshire and at Gatwick Airport, but they're fading away pretty rapidly and will completely disappear by midnight. Further showers are continuing on that fairly stiff breeze down the western side of the country, and a fairly cool night despite the wind. Could be down to 7 degrees in some central parts later on tonight. Well, there's tomorrow's chart. The low pressure moving out of the way very gradually, but still a cluster of isobars across the country, still very windy, with the next one waiting in the wings, winding itself up and ready to hit us later on tomorrow. But a bright start, plenty of sunshine around, but having said that, still some rain up in the far north of Scotland for quite some time, before brighter weather eventually moves up from the south. Now, you will find 1 or 2 showers breaking out in central or eastern parts of the country during the course of the day, but they'll be fairly few and far between, with many places staying dry. But down the western side you will see more blustery showers from time to time. Now, towards the end of the afternoon, more rain coming into southern parts of Ireland, that rain sweeping into other southwestern parts by the evening. A cool day once again, 16 to 18 degrees just about, but the wind still noticeable, still quite cool, quite fresh. And up in the far north there, I should think 13 or 14, the best temperature on offer tomorrow. So here's the rain. This is the next band coming into southern Ireland. You'll find the rain moving into many western parts of the country as we go through Tuesday evening and into much of the night as well. It'll be quite a wet night in actual fact, but the rain never reaching the far north of Scotland at all. So looking onto Wednesday, you will find this system developing across the country, then moving away into the continent during Thursday. So on Wednesday, many places starting cloudy with outbreaks of rain, but the brighter weather gradually pushing southwards during the course of the day. There'll be plenty of sunshine, but there will be some fairly beefy showers around as well. And that's it from me.
The new season on One.
We used to pride ourselves. We were the toughest. The best fighting men. You are born upon an earth which needs new. It's my life. My lads.
Their lives would never be the same. From the award-winning Linda LaPlante, Civvies begins Tuesday the 22nd of September on BBC1.
Viewers with a high quality threshold are advised not to turn to BBC 2 this evening, where they're trawling through television's most excruciating moments in TV hell, currently assisted by self-confessed master thespian Nicholas Craig. Here on BBC One now, top-quality film comedy starring and directed by Danny DeVito, with more than a hint of Alfred Hitchcock. Billy Crystal co-stars as the unwitting accessory to a murder most unintended. Throw Momma from the train.